What is up, everybody? Let's sit down for a second and let's talk about something very important that you should not be doing in leadership, and that is this: finger pointing. Now, when you were a little kid, mom would say, "Stop pointing, stop pointing. Mommy, look at that guy. Mommy, look at," and she'd be like, "Don't point. It's not polite." And so it isn't always like that, is it? It isn't always like, Tommy did it. Tommy did it, right? Finger pointing is something that can be a lot more subtle. Let me give you an example. So I was hired by a client to talk to several leaders within the organization and figure out which one was a good candidate for a leadership position that they were looking for. When I did that, I canvassed the four men, and I talked to each one of these leaders, and one in particular mentioned another one of the leaders 87 times in a 1 hour conversation. Every time he mentioned this other person's name, I put a little check down on a piece of paper and ended up counting 87 checks on that piece of paper. And it would go something like this. All right, Tom, what are some things that you think need to improve within the organization? Tom would say something to the effect of, well, frankly, this process is really, really broken. And Jason has been over it for the last 2 years. And we just had a major catastrophe happen on the production floor. And I believe Jason was there. And it was Jason's idea to do this process this way. And then we didn't get the proper documentation of which Jason was responsible for. And Jason, see, he constantly was mentioning Jason all the time. And when I asked him later, I was like, you mentioned Jason's name 87 times. I don't know if you noticed that, Tom. And he's like, I did? Well, I had no idea. So during that whole time, he's throwing Jason under the bus. He's never taking ownership. So he's throwing Jason under the bus 87 times. That's a lot to be thrown under a bus, by the way. You think once would be enough. But he threw Jason under the bus 87 times, number one. Number two, he never mentioned how he did anything wrong. And number three, he never brought real ideas to the table. He just talked about problems. And he kept pointing his finger at Jason and the problems. You see, finger pointing is bigger than just throwing someone under the bus 87 times. That sounds so brutal. It is also about pointing fingers at problems that you don't have any answers to. In leadership, knowing what not to do, of course, is half the battle. And knowing that you need to be the type of person that is calling out things. Sure, yes, I'm not saying don't talk about the problems, but I'm saying bring real answers to the table. There's nothing worse than someone who's constantly negative, someone who's always pointing out what everybody else around them is doing wrong. They're never owning what they're doing. And then on top of that, if you want to even be more corrosive, start pointing fingers at problems within the organization with zero practical answers to bring to the table. That's finger pointing. Finger pointing is something that I would not allow in any of my teams. And I don't allow it now in my coaching. The reason being is it gets you nowhere. You see, all the finger pointing in the world, and though, yes, I think you should mention problems within the organization or your team or your family. But when you're not bringing answers to the table, you're just complaining. And you're constantly deflecting what you could be doing better. During that time, have you ever considered, hey, how can I fix this problem? Have you ever considered, hey, how as we as a team or a family together can fix this problem? How many times have you ever looked past the frustrations of what's going on and maybe even wonder, hey, why is Jason doing this? Come to find out, when I looked at the processes that were going on and Tom was always throwing Jason under the bus, Jason was so overwhelmed by having so much on his shoulders, there's not any one thing that he could do well. He was so divided. He was so separated. He was so piled on top of and then still was high functioning. And when I talked to Jason, he had nothing but praise for Tom. He said, yeah, he's a hard character to get along with, but the man knows his job and he knows what he's doing and he shows up to work every day, which is a lot more than I can say for others. Michael, if you're looking for one of us to be a leader, Tom could possibly be it with coaching. So who do you think I'm looking at? Do you think I'm looking at Tom, the one who's pointing out all the problems and bringing no answers, the one who's throwing one of his coworkers, one of his teammates under the bus, stabbing him in the back 87 times? Or am I going to pick Jason? Am I going to pick Jason, who has integrity, who has honor, who's willing to point out where he's failing, who's willing to bring answers to the table, who's very much overwhelmed and yet still striving, who's not pointing fingers? Come on. I'm going to pick Jason 9 times out of 10. And it seems counterintuitive to some people, and I don't understand that. But when there's somebody like Tom who's so corrosive and undermining and constantly trying to submarine the efforts of another person, though they might be high functioning and profitable in their position, it's better off not to have them at all. Because if he's doing it to Jason, he's going to be doing it to Alex and Frank and Sally and Sarah and all the others. And no one's going to like him. And as I began to interview other people within the organization, no one had respect for Tom, other than the fact that he did know his position. He knew what he was doing, but he was a complete and total corrosive pain in the butt. You thought I was going to say something else, didn't you? So strive to understand that finger pointing is much bigger than just pointing out what everybody else is doing. It's pointing out what everybody's doing what everybody else is doing, pointing out problems, never taking out ownership, never having real answers that you're bringing to the table for those problems. You're just a complainer. And a lot of people will excuse it by saying, well, that's just how I am. Or they'll say, hey, look, man, I'm just real. I just say it how it is. No, you don't. No, you don't. You deflect using problems that are within the organization, your team and your family, and you're throwing people under the bus so no one looks at what you are actually doing. And anybody on your team who has an ounce of intelligence has already seen it. You see, when you become this person, I'm going to tell you what happens. Your coworkers, your family, they already know who you are. And they don't trust you. They have surface relationships with you. They smile at you and they try to get along with you. They'll even include you in things just to keep you from stabbing them in the back. They're only striving to keep you close to them so they can know your goings in and goings out, so they can know if you are trying to get them in the long run. That's the only reason why they keep you as an ally. After that work thing is over, or ever someone moves out of the house, they're not relying on you for anything because they know the type of person you are. So, you want to build a legacy that will far surpass your legend? You want to inspire others to do the same? You want to be a part of those world changers? You want to be a part of leading people on a high level? Stop the finger pointing and make sure your team aren't doing it also. Make sure that your team are owning them, improving them. And if there is a problem, that they come to you with it in a solid, mature, and rational way and bring answers to the table.